Good day, everyone. I am Caroline Codsi, founder and Chief Equality Officer at Women in Governance. Bonjour, je suis la présidente fondatrice de la gouvernance au féminin, Caroline Codsi, and it's an immense pleasure for me today to have our two guests, Michael Kaufman and Liz Plank, talk about the role, the crucial role of men to attain gender equality. I will begin by introducing our two guests. First of all, Liz Plank, an award-winning journalist and author. She has been listed as one of Forbes 30 under 30, mediates women most influential in news media, Marie-Claire's most powerful women, and was named one of the world's most influential people in gender policy by a Political. She's also the executive producer and host of several critically acclaimed digital series at Vox Media and NBC News, a columnist for MSNBC, and the CEO of Liz Plank Productions. She's built a loyal following on numerous social media platforms. Follow her, but her proudest accomplishment by far remains being blocked by the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump himself. For the Love of Men, her most recent book came out en français pour l'amour des hommes, et vous avez peut-être entendu Liz à Tout le monde en parle dimanche dernier. Michael Kaufman, over the past 4 decades, has been an advisor, activist, and writer, engaging men to support women's rights and violence against women and positively transform the lives of men. He has worked in 50 countries with the United Nations, governments, corporations, and women's organizations. The International Organization of Civil Servants, Political, named him to its Gender Equality Top 100. So both of you have this in common. Michael has served Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau and French President Macron on their respective G7 Gender Equality Advisory Councils. His most recent book is The Time Has Come, Why Men Must Join the Gender Equality Revolution, or I should say his most recent book in that space, because he has done other things since. Let's begin with you, Liz. You're 34 years old. You majored at McGill University in Women's Studies and International Development. Mm-hmm. You received the Sheila Feinstein Award, a prize given to outstanding undergraduate students. You also have a master's degree from the London School of Economics, but tell me, what actually motivated you to choose the field of women's studies in the first place?
Gosh, yeah, I remember still reading, deciding to go to McGill, and I'd been in school in French basically my whole life, but both my parents went to McGill, so it was like, that was the only open house I did. They were like, here's where you're going to go. But I absolutely loved McGill. And I still remember leafing through, the pamphlet of the different courses that you can take. And I still remember where I was, how I felt when I saw women's studies, like, that's a major, that's a thing you can study and major in. And so I still remember feeling like, I don't know, it's kind of how I felt when someone told me about how I'm a vegetarian. And I remember like where I was again, it's like 6 years old when someone was like, you can be a vegetarian and not eat meat. And I was like, this makes so much sense. Like there's a name for the thing that I am, right? And so I always identified with human rights generally, and I was very interested in inequality. I worked au Compagnon de Montréal, which is a center for people with disabilities, and I was a counselor there. So it was always, inequality always, it angered me, but it kind of fascinated me about how do we resolve these issues. And so, when I saw women's studies, I was like, yes. And my mom was like, you should choose another major just in case you don't find a job in this field. And I was like, okay. So then I did international development as well. And I really was like a love affair. Again, I remember my first, Gender 101 class and reading, Bell and Angela Davis, just Gloria Steinem, of course, and just being so excited that I could learn more about this topic and try and help, other women and help myself, really, because it's a deep programming. Really, when you put on those feminist, glasses, it's like very hard to take them off. And so it's been the most gratifying choice I've pretty much ever made.
Yeah, so it is a thing, and it is a career, and you're doing fabulous things. So thank you in the name of all the women and the men. Michael, and I love the diversity here. I will say your age just because it's on Wikipedia. So you're 70 years old. Liz was, what, 4 years old when you co-founded White Ribbon in 1991. Talk about pioneering. It was the largest network of men working to end violence against women worldwide. I think you mentioned, 90 countries? Really impressive. So 30 years ago, and here we are today, still talking about these same issues. And since we're in full disclosure, I was 23 years old when you founded White Ribbon. I had just arrived in Canada, and I had very high expectations, especially compared to the country where I was coming from, Lebanon. High expectations in terms of gender equality, and really convinced that Canada had that really buttoned down, and then realized as my career progressed and that I ended up in executive vice president roles, reporting to an all-male pale-stale board, that it wasn't exactly what I expected. So Michael, what motivated you in the first place to do this? And how did you have any critics? 30 years ago, how did this all start?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here with you, and to anyone who is celebrating Ramadan, Eid Mubarak to you. Well, 30 years ago or 40 years ago when I started this work, it was a strange thing. First of all, it happened because of the inspiration of so many women, and just, that day-to-day courage and heroism, both of women who were living with or escaping from abusive relationships, but also the many women who were pushing for legal reform, who were providing shelter and services to women. And basically just a lot of women were pushing, well, I guess it was a handful of us men, to take action. And when three of us, Jack Layton, and I, Ron, and I started White Ribbon, we didn't imagine it was going to spread around the world, but basically it was a response to this. In most countries, the majority of men don't use violence against women. It's not part of our lives. But the problem, one of the big problems has been that most men have been silent about the violence. And because men still, run the media, run the courts, run the police, run governments, run businesses, if men are silent, whether it's about violence against women at home or at work, whether it's about inequality, unequal pay, whether it's about inequality in decision-making, inequality in leadership, if men are silent, then those problems are going to continue. So when we started White Ribbon, it wasn't an act of penance. It wasn't an act of collective guilt or finger pointing or collective blame. It was really an act of collective love. Men saying, we can listen to the voices of women, we can learn from those voices, and we can take action. And one of the key ways that we men need to take action then and now is to reach out to our brothers, our fathers, our sons, our friends, our workmates, and say, we've got to, first of all, listen to the voices of women, and we've got to work together for change.
Very impressive.
And by the way, it's a vicious rumor. I'm 70. I'm if Liz is in this, top 30 under 30, I'm waiting for Forbes, top 70 over 70 or something. It's bizarre. Anyway,
that should be a list.
It's
That's
true.
A great idea.
Yeah, old farts for gender justice.
I'll work on the top 50 over 50. You work on the top 70 over 70. Okay. Let's make that a thing.
Okay. No. Yeah.
And any backlash? How did did women embrace this more than men, or how did you get your support?
Yeah, the reactions were interesting. There were many women who were very supportive. Their reaction was, "It's about time." But other women just, were suspicious, and I didn't blame them. They were concerned about, were men going to try to take over the space? Not that men have ever taken over anything. Were men going to sort of siphon off scarce resources going to that sector? So very real concerns, legitimate concerns. Among men, again, there was both reactions. There were some men who were hostile. There's some who got very defensive, that, oh, I don't beat my wife. But there's also a lot of men who just said, finally, this is happening. It was interesting when I first met just a few years ago, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, the first thing he said to me is, "Michael, I've known you for years." And I said, "What?" He said, "Well, when I was at McGill, like Liz, but a few years before," he said, "I wore a white ribbon." And it was a touching moment, because I think that there are a lot of men who just finally, just as Liz was saying, wow, there's a name for this. There's a way I can speak out. There's a lot of men who just felt and feel estranged from our dominant ideas and ideals of masculinity. And to find that voice, to find allies, to find colleagues, to work together for change is really, it's exciting.
Yeah, I think clearly our Prime Minister is a true feminist. It's not for any political stunt. He's always been very interested in that space, and so is his wife. So we're lucky in Canada.
Yeah.
Liz, your new book, For the Love of Men, so that's a deep dive into modern masculinity. Talking about backlash, how was it received?
Yeah, it really, look, I think controversy or debate is important, or debate is important. I don't think controversy is necessarily needed, but I think it's good to debate ideas. I actually think it's, a great sign when people feel like there's something that involves them, or something that they really want to share their opinion about. I think it's wonderful. And usually this topic, it's every time I'm on set, about to talk about it on a talk show or a podcast, or it's really remarkable. It's usually like, we can't stop talking about it even before we start talking about it. So yeah, very few people feel neutral, right, about this. And I think that's a great sign. But yes, there's been many different kinds of backlash. I mean, Michael, spoke to it very well. It's the experience that I have from, that basically, like, everyone hates me. Like, men are mad at me because
we love you.
Well, I'm obviously joking, but sometimes on some days it can feel, I mean, it's not easy. It's not like, a super, I think feminism and female empowerment has now become kind of more mainstream, and people don't feel as, but I remember going to McGill, being the only female member in our White Ribbon Club, by the way. And it was just such a beautiful experience, because I was in other feminist clubs too that were all female. And this was, I have to thank you, Michael, because it was a remarkable experience, and it gave me a model for how we can approach these conversations, right? Where I didn't feel silenced. I didn't feel like our resources were going, that I was being bulldozed. It actually felt so wonderful. And that's how feminist work should happen, that it's about allyship, and it's about men realizing, this involves me, and we are actually not different. Right? And your pain is my pain, and my oppression, things that are difficult for me in my life, like not being able to share, the full spectrum of how I feel, feeling stigma for going to therapy, not really protecting my health, and feeling like my health is really important. There's, so many different ways that the patriarchy affects men. Like, I think men realizing, wow, that pain comes from the same system that it makes you feel in pain. Like, that's something we can connect on, and that it's not a gender war. It's not like women gain something and men lose something. It's like, we should all be on the same team against oppression, against rape, against sexual assault, against violence in general. That was a big tangent. But when I was at McGill, I remember taking taxis, for example, and they would ask me, what are you studying? And I would say human rights. If I said 2000, not a long time, I haven't actually. would get, why do you hate men? Right? Just because I was interested in women's rights, I somehow was oppressive to men. So I think we've come a long way when it comes to women. And I think, you know, that was why I wrote this book. You know, a lot of women, I think, were upset that I was spending sort of my resources and my time writing about men. But I think it's really important that when we talk about the feminist revolution, when we talk about equality, when we only talk about it as being beneficial to women, it's such a disservice to the movement, and it's just not true. Like, there was a point where, because I spent 4 years doing research for the book and did just hundreds of interviews, and there was a point where I almost felt a little bit betrayed by my education, that I have a master's degree in this, like I have so much privilege and access to this education, and I was never really taught about how much men benefit in feminist societies. And I just thought, wow, like what an opportunity. Like, I felt I was shocked just discovering the research. So it felt really important for me to talk about how, that feminism, as Bell Hooks has said, you know, decades ago, feminism really is for everybody. And when we only think about it as, like, when we only think about feminism as like, well, women are then going to be in power and men are not going to be in power, it's such a lack of imagination of like how society can look like, that we're so stuck in like the pyramids and the power structures that have been imbued by the patriarchy, that we can't really free our minds to really imagine the potential of society where everyone is free.
Yeah, what you're saying is so true. I mean, I always say, you know, equality is not pie. There's enough for everyone. If somebody gets more, you're not getting less. Yeah. And Michael, in your book, you were also talking about some men who didn't feel that power. When we're saying, you know, men have all the power, women need to get a chance to, and they feel, well, what are you talking about? I'm a janitor, I'm underpaid, I'm exploited. And so how do we get these men who don't, you know, who are not your typical, you know, very well-to-do white man, middle-aged, to understand that there is a real need, urgent need for gender equality, and that everybody needs to embark on that journey?
Yeah, you know, as Liz was just saying, there are ways that men suffer in patriarchal societies. There's a price that men pay for the ways we have defined masculinity. At the same time, though, men also have various benefits. You know, if traditionally you only had to compete for jobs with half of the human species, well, that's a tangible benefit, that's a privilege. If men have the right to, you know, to walk through a park in midday and not be harassed, that's a privilege. And the thing about that, I think, that makes some of this discussion hard for men, and particularly if men with the same skin color I have and the same, you know, economic opportunities, is that when we enjoy forms of privilege, whether it's privilege based on our sex, our so-called race, our sexual orientation, our economic class, when we enjoy some forms of privilege, those things are invisible to us. It's just the way life is. And so we're often not even aware of the benefits that we gain, in this case, from a patriarchal society. At the same time, as I said, the ways that we've defined patriarchy, as the ways we've structured men's power, brings benefits to men, but also brings real costs to men. And we can see that tangibly. Men die younger than women, are more likely to be addicted to alcohol and other drugs, are more likely to take our lives by suicide, are more likely to be in prison, are less likely to get support from a doctor, are more likely to vote for Trump. I mean, there you go. But on and on. But, you know, so there's a price. But patriarchy is also a system of hierarchy of some men over other men based on race, class, sexual orientation, and so forth. And that's why we have this concept of intersectionality, to understand this. Yeah. It's not just patriarchy, not just class, it's not just, you know, race. It's how these things combine in some ways that give some people more power and privilege and resources, and others less so. But I think that, you know, what's so important here, and this, you know, I love, Liz, what you said a second ago. You know, feminism, yes, it is a movement for equality. It's a movement for equity, fairness, but it's also, I think, ultimately a movement that envisions the possibility of humans living a very different life. You know, patriarchal societies, you use the word pyramid. Patriarchal societies, whether it's the structure of our businesses, the structure of our governments, the structure, traditional structure of our home, is based on an 8,000-year-old patriarchal model. Means the rule of the father, dad on top, father knows best. And we've taken that as the template for all of society. And I think ultimately, yes, we could see feminism within that, but we can also see it as the beginning of a massive, fundamental, social, economic, political, cultural transformation, where it's not just saying, oh, you know, women are going to enter the world of power, which obviously women should. And, you know, Carolyn, you put, you know, enormous and wonderful effort into that, and that's absolutely valid. But ultimately, where's that going to take us? Well, I think it's going to take us to the redefinition of what it means to have power. I hope so, anyway.
Very, very interesting. Liz, in your book, I started jotting down some of the amazing statistics you share. And then I had pages and pages and pages of statistics, but there's just, you know, one or two that I'd like to share because I find them really striking. First of all, 99% of school shooters are men. And a woman serving in uniform has a higher likelihood of being assaulted by a fellow soldier than being killed by enemy fire. You know, things like this. And as I said, there are pages and pages. Do you feel that in this new era, this post-Trump era, this Biden-Harris, Pelosi era, do you feel that it's going to be easier for these conversations to be had for culture shift?
I hope so. I'm an optimist, eternal optimist. So I believe in the best that America can be. I believe in the best that people can be. And I really see, I see the potential. I think Joe Biden as a man is pretty interesting. Like he kind of represents this transitional masculinity from you know, I think where I stand, where he was the first VP for the first Black president, and now he's the first president for the first Black immigrant, you know, Indian American vice president, you know, the first Black woman, first woman of color to hold that office. So he really is I think a really interesting character to sort of usher us into what I think Michael, you know, so brilliantly explained of just the redefinition of everything, right? And so Trump, in many respects, represented, I mean, he was like a parody, right, of this sort of idealized masculinity or traditional masculinity, however you want to call it, where, yeah, I mean, just, again, I don't want to, he wants us to talk about him and we will not, but just the way that he handled COVID, right? Like, you know, literally getting it because he wasn't protecting himself. And then, you know, and obviously the way that it was handled, where he dismissed masks really, really early on. And there were reports that he thought that it made him look weak. And so that's why he wasn't wearing them. So we really saw the repercussions, right, of this you know, masculinity ideal that not just affects men's lives on a personal level, but affects us as societies. And one thing that I think, speaking of data, and it's not in the book because it just came out, but I really want to share it because I think it's a really great example of why I'm optimistic. So men are less likely, generally, you've all heard, I'm sure, all of these studies generally over the last year and a half, that men are less likely to wear masks, they're less likely to wash their hands and practice safe hygiene and want, you know, governments to impose lockdowns and gather, you know, limit gatherings and stuff like that. But I love that there's a researcher a few weeks ago in the US who decided, okay, let's study men and women and look at gender differences, but let's look at the gender differences within men. So what they did was that they examined women's behaviors, they examined men's behaviors, but they asked men, how do you identify in terms of your masculinity? Do you identify as not masculine? Do you identify as somewhat masculine? Do you identify as very masculine? And what they found was that actually men who identified as not very masculine, like who weren't really attached to their masculine identity, their behaviors were pretty much like women's. The gender differences actually were like completely erased. Where you saw the big difference in, reluctance to get the vaccine, people who had gathered with more than 10 people in the last month, they were men who identified as very masculine, right? And so the reason why I think this is a positive thing is that it suggests, and I give more examples in the book about this very phenomenon, but this is recurring in new emerging research, that the best predictor for men's behaviors is not their biological gender, it's their relationship to their gender. It's how they view, right, the ideal of masculinity and how much they think that they need to perform it. And the reason why this is so good is that that's completely malleable. My relationship with my gender has completely changed. I grew up in the 90s, like Disney princesses and all my favorite celebrities had eating disorders. And like, it was just so toxic and so bad. But I, have done a lot of work. Now there's new models, there's new movies, there's new roles, right, in society and new representations because of you, Carolyn, and many other women who are saying, no, you can be so many other things as a woman. And so that means that we can present those models for men as well. And that, yeah, they're not fixed, right? There's the boys will be boys, right? We often talk about it, how it's, it means, they're just inherently, the way that they are. There's something so dismissive about that and reductive about that. Michael Kimmel says, why don't we say boys will be boys when a man wins the Nobel Peace Prize, right? Like, why do we think that because that men are somehow incapable of evolution or change or improvement, self-improvement in the way that we kind of assume women are? So I think we need to sort of add more nuance to our conversations and to our academia and our research when it comes to men, to really tease out those differences, because I think it's great news.
Can I jump in, Caroline? I love what you just said. It's one reason why I bristle when people refer to the male brain or the female brain, or we're basically the same with some differences. But a lot of the differences in our behaviors and ideas are, of course, and even body in some strange ways, how we walk or sit is socially constructed. And what we know about men, and that study you referred to about men who see themselves as, really identified with our dominant ideas of masculinity and their behavior that follows, is masculinity, bizarrely, is a fear-based construction. Yeah. It's based on fear of being a woman, fear of not being a real man, fear of being gay, all these different, things. And what is so wonderful is that among boys, among men, in spite of being pummeled by years of just messaging and imaging about what a real man is, and for some boys having things beaten out of them, literally, that there's still so much resistance and resilience among boys and men. One of the exciting areas that we're seeing, we see this, and we're seeing a massive gender transformation right now around us, is in the transformation of fatherhood. We're seeing more and more men, certainly, when I think of my son, if anyone said to him what people said to me when my kids were young, oh, you're helping out with your kid or you're babysitting. If anyone said that to my son, he'd want to, bop them, because he doesn't think of himself as helping out. I mean, he's a parent. And this is a profound transformation, and it's going to have huge repercussions for our workplaces, for careers, for lowering violence against women and all forms of gender-based violence, for reasons we don't, it would take time to get into. But I join you, Liz. I am very optimistic. And within that optimistic, of course, there's pushback. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when I'm working with men, I'm doing a lot of stuff these days, it seems, on male allyship in corporations and professional firms. It's, just a lot happening, which is exciting. Sometimes I'll have men say, oh yeah, we did something and there was no pushback, there was no resistance, everyone just loved it. And I said, you're probably doing something wrong. Because if we're not, we're up against, an 8 or 10,000-year-old structure. We're up against, which is not just a structure, but has been taken in by too many men as the definition of who they are and what they believe and what they should do. If there's no resistance, it means we're doing something wrong. I'm not saying you say things just to be provocative or to get resistance, but we do, yes, we embrace men, we welcome men, we say we can be allies, but I just say as a man, we're also challenging our brothers. We're challenging ourselves. And if that challenge isn't there, then we're not doing our job.
Yeah. Agreed. And also about, the younger generation of fathers much more involved, thank God. Finally, they are, but they still don't do the dishes, by the way. There was a report that came out on that, saying that the burden with the children has been alleviated somewhat by fathers being more involved. And we've seen it with COVID, right? I mean, in Canada alone, there was a report by RBC that 100,000 women left the workforce compared to 10,000 men. And some lost their jobs at a much faster pace than the men, but a lot of them just opted out altogether, but because they just couldn't handle the homeschooling and taking care of the house and doing their jobs. So it's to me very concerning for a pipeline of female talent for our future leaders. And the other thing I wanted to share also, as I'm listening to both of you, is definitely for the past few decades, we've put a lot of emphasis on needing to support women and help the women and fix the women so that we can reach gender equality. And there's nothing further from the truth. I mean, women are just fine. We do have certain, typically female obstacles to overcome. We still tend to have trouble coming out of our comfort zone, being too modest, not, assertive enough, especially my generation. There's truth to that, but there's definitely work to be done at, other pillars. So first of all, definitely what we're talking about today, which is men and the immense work that both of you are doing around that. There's government. There's the fact that we need more legislation that is, leaning towards women. And we've seen with the new our first female Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, the budget is feminist, and there's a lot of emphasis put on daycare and making sure women can go back into the workforce. And that's extremely important. And there's a huge ROI, a huge return on investment for every dollar spent. You can actually bring back $2 into the economy. Extremely important. And then there's organizations, and this is where Women in Governance is actually doing most of their work, is to support organizations that want to concretely close the gender gap in the workplace. So shift the culture, change the policies, implement initiatives that are actually going to support women who want to progress. So, a deep dive into the organizations, both quantitative and qualitative data to understand where they stand on the spectrum of parity. Now, the culture shift that we're hoping for, have we really attained it? I mean, we still hear things like big boys don't cry. How do we stop that? How do we get educators, daycare teachers, parents to have different behaviors relative to a boy who's sensitive or a girl who wants to be an action hero if she wants to? How do we get that?
Question for Michael.
Oh, Liz, you jump in. I was just talking last.
Quickly, because you've literally changed culture, so I really am curious what you think. But yeah, I think there are a few principles, right? And there's so many things you said I want to touch on, but the fact that girls are less assertive and women are less assertive, we get punished when we are, and men can be overconfident, but they get punished if they're not, right? So there's some studies I talk about just in the book about the workplace, right? That there's this idea that, men don't ask, real men, whatever that means, don't ask for directions. Well, when male managers ask questions and don't act like they know everything and that they know exactly where they're going and that they don't need directions, they're actually rated more poorly by the other people around them. And obviously the same for female It's, you know, this, I'm sure all the women who are in this Zoom know this as well. It's a complete catch-22, because you are told act more like a man, because that's how we view leadership. Like there's no, like, again, redefining the pyramid, redefining power. So women are told act more like men, but then we get punished when we act more like men. So there's a lot, you know, I spent a while telling men, you know, we have to be just as comfortable telling women to act more like men than telling men to act more like women. But it's actually just like letting people be who they are, letting children be who they are, right? The question that I start a lot of my talks with, you know, I'll ask, you know, who has kids, and, you know, a lot of people raise their hands, and, you know, I say, okay, who has ever told their daughter that she can do anything that a boy can do? And everyone's like, yes. And then I'm like, okay, who has told their son that he can do anything that a girl can do? And then all of a sudden it's like kind of like crickets, right? And I think people realize, wow, like, yeah, I think I'm so thoughtful about the books that I get her. I'm so thoughtful about, you know, yeah, Disney princesses, Barbies, like, do we want to give her those toys? Do we want to offer more alternatives and options? Yeah, there's more of a consciousness around that, protecting our daughters, but we need to protect our sons as well, and really protect all of our children from limitations of society, from expectations and ideals that make them perform a certain way, make them wear a social mask, and develop personalities that aren't really true to who they are. And so I think so much about the potential, the lost potential, really, of a society that makes people, you know, fall in line and go, like, you go in that door and you go in that door, if, you know, based on arbitrary physical characteristics, right? So to me, it's a real conversation, just, yeah, around potential. But Michael, very curious about.
Well, no, I love what you just said, and I love what the question that you posed to audiences. It's fantastic. It's I think there's so many different levels to this, and I think often we get stuck on one level, one part of the answer. So, for example, there's a level around policy. I'm so glad Carolyn mentioned policy. In North America, we put so much emphasis on, oh, well, they just do it. You know, the individual, just, you know, lean in, do this, do that. Well, if we don't have the policy, if we don't have the legal frameworks, and so when Carolyn mentioned some initiatives in Canada to finally develop a national daycare system, or when I think 2 years ago, Canada brought in laws that were pioneered in the Scandinavian country, referred to as daddy days, which have a use it or lose it policy for parental leave for men taking it. Policies like that are key, because part of the change is going to take place among children when they see, if they happen to live in a home where there's a male and a female parent, where they see the mom and dad taking on equal work, whether it's looking after the kids or doing the dishes or cooking or shopping or the planning, or excuse me, or you know, going off to work outside the home. That's going to have a huge impact on kids, just what they see. And we need that policy. We need the social supports for those things to happen. We need men speaking out. We need, you know, when one of the things that has, you know, just been so striking to me for decades now is the number of men who just live in such fear of, as I was saying before, but live in such fear of not living up to these expectations of manhood, that we end up saying things or acting in ways that are not true to ourselves. You know, men who, you know, will tell that or repeat that sexist joke or homophobic joke just to sort of prove ourselves to our buddies, or won't say anything when someone says or does something that we know is wrong. So, you know, encouraging that authenticity among men, I think is so important, as, you know, whether it's talking to our sons or talking to our workmates. I love it when men who are in leadership positions act in authentic ways. And I mean authentic, I mean, you could say authentically bad, but I'm talking about that actually debunked these notions of manhood. One of the stories I tell in The Time Has Come is a British banker based in Singapore, head of operations for one of the huge international banks for all of Asia. And he talked about, we were doing a thing together in Singapore a few years ago, And so he talked about how he had responsibility for getting his kids up in the morning and making them breakfast and then taking them to school. And the audience was, this is slightly weird. They were, you could tell by the looks, but it was okay. And he said, this is really important to my kids. And people go, oh, I guess so. And then he said, it's really important to my wife to pursue her career. People go, okay. And then he said, and it's really important to me, he said. And he said, yes, I'm connected to them. It's important for that way. But let me tell you why it's one of the reasons it's very important to me. He said, it's made me a better leader. This is to a business audience. He says, made me a better leader. I'm listening better. I'm asking more questions. I understand the situation of the people reporting to me better. And, he went on and on. In other words, he took the risk of just saying, I'm not going to read from the script. I'm going to talk about what I'm doing, how I'm feeling. And so I think that level is really important. And particularly, in this conversation, there's a lot of men and women and others, however people define, who are part of this event right now, who are thinking about how in my workplace can I intervene. And I think there's so many things. We need initiatives, we need policies in our workplaces, we need training, we need all those things. But we also need men to work alongside women and to work as leaders, to challenge ourselves and challenge our brothers and our workmates.
Absolutely. Well, time is running, and I really want to make sure we have hundreds of attendees, and I really want to ensure that their questions can be addressed as well. I could spend the day with the two of you. You're quite amazing, and thank you again for agreeing to do this. Now, one of our key team members, who's program manager of our acclaimed Parity Certification at Women in Governance, Rafael Moya, he's going to moderate the Q&A period. And so as you can see, we really walk the talk at Women in Governance. We've got women and men at every level of the organization, on all our committees, our volunteers, even our board is co-chaired by a woman and a man, Monique Leroux and Norm Steinberg. So we really believe in the complementarity of talent. So Rafa, take it away for questions from the audience, please.
So thank you so much, and welcome everyone again. I want to thank Liz and Michael for such an insightful discussion and for truly showing that the feminist roadmap is not a zero-sum game, that it's allowing the road for everybody to win and to live to their fullest capabilities. So we have a plethora of questions by the audience. I'm first going to start focusing on those questions that are more focused on social issues, and then I'll move into concrete questions for the workplace. So this is an open question. What are the thoughts on the surge resurgence of the men's movement that we are seeing? What would you see as being a key to what makes for a healthy movement and what does not?
Michael, you take it.
Yeah, it's, we're seeing many different things, and we have for many years. There's been that sort of men's movement, which is a backlash, which is trying to say, men are going to be men. So it's a real sort of backlash movement, rounding the, circling the wagons or whatever. So, just because it's, a group of men doing something doesn't mean it's a good thing. So I think there's definitely those backlash movements, that sort of reassertion of these traditional ideas of manhood. It's just crap stuff. It's sad stuff. But unfortunately, it resonates with too many people, with too many young men who are feeling unsure of themselves, who are feeling, as most of us do in our society, not having much power. And if you're a man, you're supposed to have power. You're supposed to have control. And if you see that slipping away, too many boys and, well, young men, let's say, and grown, older men, look for someone to blame, look for a scapegoat. So they may do that in racist terms. They may do it in sexist terms or homophobic terms. We see, movements in the U.S. now that are doing it in all of the above. It's challenging stuff. I think that one of the things that I do when I'm speaking, and someone will stand up and he'll represent that what gets called the men's rights point of view. I'll find the one thing I agree with him. Like he'll say, men suffer in our society. I'll say you're absolutely right, and I'll just say, you know, we're on the same page. And in other words, I won't start by pushing him away. I'll start by bringing him in and say, this is, you know, I agree with you on that. But for me, the reason that's happening is not because of feminism. It's not because of equal rights. It's not because men are being discriminated against. It's because finally, we're understanding that patriarchy itself, as Liz was saying, comes with costs to men. Finally, we're trying to bring about a safer, more equal society. So yeah, you know, I think you know, try to create spaces. Liz was talking about this much earlier about how to have conversations, to create welcoming spaces for our discussion. There's a real history in progressive movements of people trying to sort of, you know, just going after the differences. Oh, Liz, I can't work with you because I don't wear yellow sweaters. We can't work together. You know, just, it's, you know, I'm being silly here, but you know what I mean. To be aware of differences, to talk about them, to challenge each other, but at the same time to embrace where we have common cause. So I think with those men who are not initially supportive, to do our best to keep them in the conversation, but not back down, not make excuses for abusive behavior that if they are abusive, but also to remember. I remember the years ago when one of my first books on men came out, and I'd done, you know, these radio phone-in shows, and you know, I had men calling in and ranting and raving. And I talked to one of the great Canadian feminist leaders, Judy Rebick, and who's just like brilliant on the radio. And I said, Judy, I mean, maybe there's some way I can say things different that is going to reach those men who are so hostile. And she said, Michael, you know, I was talking a lot about violence against women. She said, did it ever occur to you that some of those are the men who are using violence in their relationships? In other words, you know, don't, you know, if we have, you know, half of women in the world who are experiencing or have experienced some form of physical or sexual violence, it means that, you know, there's a whole bunch of men who have done those things. So let's be aware that, yes, there are confused men who are embracing these, you know, men's rights things, but there's also misogynistic men and men who use violence who also do. And let's not be naive about that.
Thank you so much.
I mean, +1 to everything. The patriarchy is like a perfect pyramid scheme. Like it's just such a scam because it promises so many things. And as Michael said, based on race, class, right, all the other identities, you know, most men don't think that they'll benefit and are told this is how you will rise up to the top, but they never do. And so anyway, I could go into the data just on like the distribution of income with white men. Like white men's income in total has risen like this, but you know why? Because 10 of them are hoarding all of white men's money. So if you look at the average white man, it is not, you know, increasing. And so they see a conversation about feminism, they see a conversation about privilege, and they say, wait, I'm hardly making it, right? I have pain, I have suffering. And as Michael said, the goal, I think in those conversations is to see the pain, right? Because if you refuse to see someone's pain, you're not seeing them. Yeah. Is to see that pain, recognize that pain, and redirect the blame, right? As Michael said, I think self-responsibility is a masculine virtue in our society, actually, for men who have been raised in this patriarchy. And I find that is again, just thinking about what message we're sending, like it might be a good one to be like, this is, you know, these are real problems and this is real pain. But let's not blame it on someone whose fault it isn't. Let's actually take responsibility for changing it. And it begins with you. It begins with, and again, seeing that your pain is not different from women's pain. So yeah, I'm hopeful. The way that I wrote my book, I didn't write this anywhere, but it was like in my mind the whole time. I was like, what would be Tucker Carlson's like worst nightmare? Like Tucker Carlson is this like right-wing, right, white supremacist Fox News host. And I was like, how can I put this in a way that will piss him off? Because he won't be able to take a quote from my book and be like, see, she hates you. She hates men. That's why I put love in the title. It's like, I love men, right? Like it's because I love you that I want you to have this conversation with me. I want you to join this movement with me. So again, it's, you know, and if those conversations are unsafe or, you know, obviously don't, you know, go into them. But yeah, if you are able to find something in common, find something that you can agree on, and then move from there, it's just a completely different, you know, conversation.
And to be aware at the same time, you know, find that commonality, but also, I mean, for those of us in this conversation who are men, understanding that there's a lot of listening that's going on. If I'm sitting down with a Black man in North America, I'm not going to start off by saying, oh, I've got a lot to tell you about. I'm going to start with listening, because his reality within a racist patriarchal society, to say the least, is profoundly different from mine. And so that relationship to power, there may be forms of power he enjoys within his community as a man or in society as a whole, but there's also massive forms of oppression and discrimination. So yeah, that listening and empathy and learning is so important.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this really great responses. The following question is, so based on the discussion, wouldn't you think that we need parenting education or mother's education, just because, of course, you know, mothers are still the major contributor for household support, to have a shift in the mindset early on so that the male population is brought up with the right values? So to create sort of education platforms in which, you know, men and young boys are presented with the tools and with the right behaviors to become effective parents.
Yeah, I mean, we need good parenting education. We need programs in our schools. We need all those different things. But it's actually what's going to change things most is when people's behavior changes. That's when the ideas are going to change. And that's why parental leave programs are so critical. And that's why we know now, the evidence around the world now is that when we have these so-called daddy days, take it or leave it programs, and this, we have incredible statistics from Quebec, from the Scandinavian countries, of just, you know, once we say to men, to a couple, here's some time off. If men don't take this month or two, whatever it is, you're not going to have it. Men just jump in. And it's in the activity, the behavior of being a parent, that values shift, that ideas shift, that appreciation for women's traditional activities shifts, that the models for our boys shift, not just for those men who take that leave, but for all the others around them, for the society as a whole. So yeah, we need not just the programs, but we need companies to be much more responsive. We need managers. You know, when I talk to managers and executives about parental leave initiatives, you know, one of the things is just so basic. You know, managers should not say to a man or woman who's about to become a parent, "Are you going to take parental leave?" But, you know, how many months are you going to take off? How can we facilitate that? How can we bring about a smooth reentry at the end of it? What do you need for support while you're away? I mean, all these things, we just have to shift the discussion within our companies. So it's just a norm that, of course, if you're going to be a parent, you're going to take time off because you've got to. And it's important.
Yeah, most fatherly leave is not taken in the world, right? Unless you have that set as the default. So, and one thing I'll say, just it's a practice, and everything you're saying is so true. To add one more thing, you know, that's a practical thing that men particularly can do, is, so we tend to overvalue how much women are leaving early. Like if a woman leaves early from work, we all assume, women too, everyone goes, oh, she's probably getting her kid from school. Maybe her kid is sick. We assume that it's a non-work related reason. When men leave early from work, we assume that it's a work related reason. So we say, oh, you must have a big meeting or a big dinner, right? Like happy hour or whatever. And so one thing that men can do in the workplace is actually, when they are leaving to go pick up their child, when they do need that parental leave, when their kid is sick and they have to leave, to say it. to say, this is the reason, yeah, I have to pick up my son, or, you know, to really share those things, because that will start breaking, again, our expectations, and really make a difference, again, in the workplace, in terms of it being completely neutral, right? To take parental leave or to have need flexibility. That it's not a woman thing, it's just a parent thing. It's a gender neutral need that everyone has.
Yeah, that's so true, Liz. But I think there's still some unconscious bias in the workplace.
Oh, yeah.
Where when the woman goes to pick up her kid at the daycare, it's seen as annoying. Again, she needs to leave early. When it's the man, oh, it's so cute. He's such a dedicated father. So that also needs, and that comes, by the way, not just from the man, it also comes from the women who will have these reactions. Mm-hmm. These are things that we really need to deconstruct.
Yeah. And what you're saying is shown by data. The way that employers basically rank their employees in likability and how well they think that they perform, it goes women with children, women without children, men without children, men with children. It's like fathers, have this social capital, right? It's an immense, you know, and again, it's not equal to all fathers, and you know, we can talk about the intersections of race and sexual orientation and all of that, but fatherhood is something that's really celebrated in our society. And so fathers have a lot of social capital in the workplace that goes unused. And I think is a great investment if they want to do it.
I like
that.
I think
we have time for one last question.
Yes.
On the answers though.
This is a question for you, and particularly around digital media. It comes from a participant who works in an industry association that represents mainly a male-dominated industry. And so as a digital media creator, what kind of content, mainly digital, can I create to help the men in our industry become allies and help encourage gender equality in our industry?
I love it. First of all, it should be hosted by a man, because men listen to other men, and women obviously don't not hire women. Obviously, that's not the goal. But yeah, I think when that message comes from a fellow man, it just will land differently, and will, you know, you just access a different kind of audience. So that would be my sort of first inclination. But I don't know what the industry. It's like a very mysterious question. I don't know what the industry is, so I can't give you specific advice. But yeah, I think just creating, I mean, the way that I've approached it with my book and all that stuff, and just, you know, I've progressed in my work as in feminism, and my, you know, we all look at things we did 5 years ago and we're like, I can't believe I did that. So I will look back on what I'm doing now and be like, that was not great. But the way that I really approach these topics is that I really, again, I have sort of this inclusive mindset where I try and make sure that no matter, where someone's from, no matter what, you know, racial identity or sexual orientation or gender non-binary people, right? People with disabilities, making sure that content is accessible for people no matter what their differences are. Like I really try and make content that no one will feel left out of. Is kind of my philosophy right now. And so, you know, instead of just focusing again on all the benefits for women or focusing on how to be an ally so that women are better off, yes, but also let's use inclusive language to signal that everyone is better off. So that would be my very general advice.
Thank you so much, Liz. I think, Rafa, we unfortunately don't have any more time. It's already 1 o'clock. Thank you for moderating the Q&A period. I obviously have to thank you warmly, the two of you, Liz and Michael. Liz, I've been a huge fan of yours for so many years, so it was an immense honor for me to host you today. We were both in the documentary 50-50, 50-50 a few years ago, and that's where I got to know you a little bit better. So an immense thank you for not only all the work that you do, but all the work that you're going to keep doing, because you're that young generation that is just so powered up with energy and immense ideas. So merci infiniment. Michael, thank you as well. You said yes in a heartbeat, and we've also been friends for a few years, and have had opportunities to work together on different committees. So it was really a true honor and pleasure to have you both. I hope that we got our audience thinking of all the things that we discussed, because everybody can do something to advance our society towards a more just and equal society. So let's work at it together. And I think we demonstrated that men, women, all ages, all origins, and all different, it doesn't really matter what you do for a living, but as long as you understand the benefit to our entire society, you're going to want to be a part of this. I obviously also want to thank our sponsors for making this event happen: Alexa Translations, Air Canada, Ivanhoe Cambridge, La Presse, and the Globe and Mail. And of course, the organizations that trust women in governance to support them in closing the gender gap. And there's a slide that is going to come up just about now with the 58 organizations. If you could go to the next slide, right here, the 58 organizations that we have honored at our gala last week that received Parity Certification from bronze to gold on the left side, and on the right side, the 8 that made it all the way to platinum. So with that, we will leave you, and thank you so much, Liz, Michael, Rafael, and our audience and sponsors for making this happen. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Thank you, Caroline. Keep up the great work.
Yes,
Merci.
thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Au revoir.